I think the notion of taking on new facts about your world, new learnings, is immensely invigorating. I actually think that it's like a virtuous loop for me. It makes me feel sparkle-arkling, it makes me feel as if life's worth a candle. It actually gives me energy as long as you can find your own strong points within it and your own stable basis. I think it's a great way to live.
Tonight, playground politics. Tony Abbott out front on education spending. MC Rudd, he's back and stealing the show.
Hello, how are you?
Why the processing freeze won't stop Afghan asylum seekers. And the fast food manager accused of demanding money for work. Good evening, Juanita Phillips with ABC News. After a lean and mean start, Tony Abbott turned big spender today. He splashed out with a promise worth almost $800 million and in one hit allocated about 2/3 of the savings he announced yesterday. Mr Abbott's tax rebate is aimed at helping families recover some of their education expenses. But the government says he's the one who needs help with arithmetic. Here's Chief Political Correspondent Mark Simpkin.
Who's going to catch this ball? Come on, let's go.
Sometimes politics is child's play.
Hey, Tony, catch!
Tony Abbott's the king of the kids. He's turned educational costs into a political football. Although perhaps he's lucky this election will be decided in the rugby states.
We're going to sneak out of the way now.
Primary school children will be eligible for a $500 a year rebate, $1,000 for children in secondary school.
This is very important because it provides more money to families that are under financial pressure.
The existing means-tested rebate will also cover a wider range of expenses, subsidising private school fees, tutoring and special education costs for children with disabilities. Also covered music, dance and drama lessons, sporting gear, instruments, camps and excursions.
We'll pay more, it will cover more and it will start sooner than is the case with the government's rebate.
It's Tony Abbott's first big handout of the campaign, an attempt to undercut Julia Gillard on education.
We're going to do some julienning of the carrots.
Okay, all right.
The plan will cost $760 million over the Ford estimates, 2/3 of the savings he announced yesterday. Although in a sign of sloppiness, the coalition press release hedges its bets, and the government says the sums don't add up.
Tony Abbott has created the first black hole for the Liberal Party in this campaign. And our Conservative estimate is that the cost will be at least double.
You look so beautiful. You are.
Julia Gillard spent another day in Western Sydney, announcing plans to expand work experience programs.
Go the women.
She found plenty of friends, although one had a reservation.
I was a bit cross with her over the asylum seekers because I was at Villawood, and I think she stuffed it up.
Another boat arrived this morning, the first of the campaign. 40 people were on board.
I've been very clear, there's no quick fix here. There's no quick fix.
Hollow words from a hollow woman PM, just like we saw from her predecessor. She is once again Kevin Rudd with red hair when it comes to matters of immigration.
On education at least, the coalition's gone positive, even if its handout conflicts with its savings mantra. Tomorrow, both sides will call a day-long ceasefire, with campaigning suspended for the funeral of a soldier killed in Afghanistan. Mark Simpkin, ABC News, Canberra.
For an hour or so today, a one-man band became the nation's third political force. When Kevin Rudd stepped out for his first campaign event in Brisbane, madness took hold. He lapped up the media attention and then tried to offer Julia Gillard some reassurance, saying he wouldn't speak out on national affairs for the next few weeks. Political correspondent Greg Jennett reports.
The lonely life of the Labor member.
Mr. Rudd, many Australians want to know what you're going to do in this election campaign.
Not this guy. Australia's most famous backbencher is hot property again.
It's great to be back here at Cooper Estate School. I've been coming here for 12 or 15 years now.
We've been supporting Julia Gillard's campaign.
He missed the official opening of the hall that the education revolution built.
Hello, how are you?
He'd just been knifed the day they really moved in.
So we've got seats, we've got lighting. Who can think of something else that they like about this? Yeah.
This was Kevin Rudd in the round, fully amped.
Little guy up the back there, yeah.
And sounding distinctly like he's got a record and a reputation to defend.
It's not just here at Coorparoo that we've been able to do this. In fact, right across Australia. So that when it's really hot, really hot, you've got somewhere nice to come to get together.
There was a mastery behind the entire appearance. With just as many media as Julia Gillard could muster, it grew into one big look-at-me exercise, although nothing Kevin Rudd said could, on the face of it, offend anyone.
I'll be talking about local issues like that because I'm the local member. As for national issues, that lies properly with the province of others, and I won't be commenting on those. Thanks for your time.
Local voters angry about the way you were treated, though.
There's nothing Labor's national campaign team can do except hope the novelty wears off. And there's certainly nothing Julia Gillard can do publicly but grin and be gracious.
I'm very happy to be campaigning alongside Kevin Rudd in Griffith. I'm available to do that. I'm available to campaign where I'm needed.
All he has to do is ask. Greg Jennett, ABC News, Canberra.
Well, as many politicians learn the hard way, real life has a way of crashing unexpectedly into the most carefully laid plans. The Premier, Christina Keneally, was at Sydney's Westmead Hospital today to show off a brand new ward to the Federal Health Minister. But the PR exercise backfired when the family of a patient took the opportunity to air their grievances about a broken toilet.
It was a campaign celebration of new beds featuring a Premier and both the state and federal health ministers.
And you've got a room to yourself today at the moment. Yeah. Probably not for much longer, I assume.
But just a few floors up, one patient didn't even have a working toilet. Elizabeth Weigold approached the media distressed about the conditions her 69-year-old father endured.
Disgusting. I mean, to see someone you love and who is struggling to breathe and not well, and to have to walk and look for a toilet is just...
it's bad.
It's just bad.
There were 7 people to a shower, faulty air conditioning, even pillows were scarce.
There were no pillows. Like, you have to find, they found him a pillow, but
even before he went to surgery, one of the nurses made a comment, don't send his pillow, because she said we won't get it back.
ABC cameras were not allowed onto the floor, but other parts of the hospital show mouldy ceiling tiles and worn carpet. In the new ward, the Premier was invited to use the soap dispenser. Back in the public toilets, there is no soap.
There's always ongoing maintenance issues in a hospital. I routinely deal with those maintenance issues. I'm sure this is an issue that we can resolve.
Elizabeth Weigold says the medical staff are doing a great job in difficult circumstances. The Health Minister says nurse numbers have increased by 10% over the past 5 years. The union says it's not nearly enough. The Nurses Association says it wants mandated nurse-to-patient staff ratios.
We know that those nurses are still struggling day to day with their workloads, and so we know those numbers are not right, and this is about addressing some of those issues.
The main issue for Elizabeth Weigold is her father returning home safe and well. Matt Wordsworth, ABC News.
As we mentioned earlier, another boatload of asylum seekers has been intercepted off Christmas Island. The Prime Minister has reiterated there's no quick solution to the problem. Pakistani immigration officials agree. They say a freeze on processing asylum applications has done nothing to stop Afghan nationals trying to make their way here. South Asia correspondent Sally Sara reports.
Pakistan's Federal Investigation Agency says Australia's 6-month freeze on new Afghan asylum applications has failed. The FIA says the measure has done nothing to stop the flow of Afghans crossing the border and trying to make their way to Australia.
It has hardly any impact, because the living conditions in Christmas Island are much better than the living conditions in Afghanistan or in Quetta.
The Federal Investigation Agency says the only way to stop people smugglers is to allow Pakistani investigators to interrogate asylum seekers on Christmas Island.
It will be better if we can be involved in this interrogation process.
The Australian Federal Police are working closely with their Pakistani counterparts, but won't say if they will take it a step further.
As far as access to people on Christmas Island, they're things that really need to be considered in the fullness of the nation. I wouldn't like to comment on that. There's been no decision made on that from our perspective.
More than 83,000 Afghans have returned to their homeland from Pakistan so far this year. But the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees says the process can't be pushed too quickly.
because in the last 5 years Afghanistan has absorbed a fifth of its population again, just in returning refugees.
The movement of people across the border from Afghanistan to Pakistan is historic and complicated. For some people, this is just a stepping stone on the way to another country. For others, this is a temporary place as they go backwards and forwards across the frontier. But for many thousands more, Pakistan has become their permanent home. Pakistan has 1.7 million registered Afghans living on its soil.
There's a war in Afghanistan, and I'll only go back when there's peace.
Some Afghans are unsure whether to return home or risk everything and try to travel to Australia. Sally Sarah, ABC News.
Britain's case for the 2003 invasion of Iraq has been dealt another damaging blow. The former head of the intelligence service, MI5, says Iraq posed little threat to the UK before the war. Baroness Eliza Manningham-Buller also argues the conflict led to a surge of terror plots against domestic targets. Europe correspondent Emma Alberici on a day of remarkable testimony at the official British inquiry into the Iraq War.
She was Britain's most senior intelligence officer between 2000 and 2007 during the invasion of Iraq and its aftermath. But the toppling of Saddam Hussein had not made the UK any safer. In fact, she said, it had made matters worse.
Our involvement in Iraq radicalised, for want of a better word, but a whole generation of young people. Some of them British citizens, not a whole generation, a few among a generation, who saw our involvement in Iraq on top of our involvement in Afghanistan as being an attack on Islam.
According to the then chief of MI5, 80 British men had gone off to fight in Iraq, not as members of the country's military, but against the Allied forces as part of the insurgency.
And arguably, we gave Osama bin Laden his Iraqi jihad.
Her evidence was in stark contrast to that of Britain's political champions of the war.
I believe we made the right decision for the right reasons.
If you were a regime engaged in WM, you had to stop.
The day after September 11, she flew over New York. The Baroness told the Iraq inquiry MI5 had not found any credible intelligence implicating Iraq in the attacks. Further, she said there was no intelligence to suggest a terrorist plot born of any cooperation between Al-Qaeda and Iraq. Emma Alberici, ABC News, London.
President Obama and the new British Prime Minister have been holding talks in Washington, but the discussion's been overshadowed by US anger over the release of the Lockerbie bomber. At issue is whether BP played a part in securing the bomber's freedom from a Scottish jail. British leader David Cameron rejected US demands for a new investigation, but he's ordered a review of the case. Here's Washington correspondent Craig McMurtry.
An Oval Office meeting, lunch with the President and a very personal tour of the White House.
I have to say I was most impressed by how tidy your children's bedrooms were.
In their first talks in Washington, the leaders stressed their shared agenda on the global economy and Afghanistan, expressing support for Hamid Karzai's new plan to take over security operations by 2014.
Today's historic Kabul conference is another major step forward.
But David Cameron's visit to Washington is being dogged by continuing US anger over last year's release of Lockerbie bomber Abdel Basset al-Megrahi and new questions about whether BP lobbied behind the scenes to win an oil deal with Libya.
I think all of us here in the United States were surprised and angry about the release.
The bomber, a cancer patient, was released on compassionate grounds. BP denies any involvement, and the new British Prime Minister told reporters the company isn't to blame.
And I haven't seen anything to suggest that the Scottish Government were in any way swayed by BP.
After initially refusing to meet 4 US senators who are demanding an investigation into BP's role, the British Prime Minister changed his mind, though Mr Cameron is rejecting calls for a new inquiry.
We had what we called a violent agreement, which is that releasing the Lockerbie bomber was completely wrong.
While ruling out a new inquiry, the British Prime Minister has ordered a review of all documents relating to the controversial case and is promising British cooperation in any congressional investigation. Craig McMurtry, ABC News, Washington.
Police in Sydney have uncovered an alleged cash for jobs scam. They've arrested and charged the former manager of a fast food outlet. He's accused of making more than $20,000 by convincing foreign students to pay him money to get jobs. David Spicer reports.
For almost 2 years, police allege this former restaurant manager was cashing in on Indian students hungry for work. It's claimed when they applied for a job at the Hungry Jack's outlet in suburban Parklee, he'd asked them for between $500 and $3,500 in cash.
It was put to them that this was the process to be followed to gain employment. So not knowing any better, they did as they were asked.
It's alleged the manager received more than $20,000 from 15 people. Most were employed in return for the payment. The 47-year-old Filipino national was arrested this morning and charged with 14 counts of receiving a corrupt reward. He was granted conditional bail and will appear in court next month. Coming on the heels of a spate of attacks on Indian students, police hope the incident does not further damage Australia's reputation on the subcontinent.
I sincerely hope not. This is a case where Indian nationals have been the victim of a crime which has been reported to police, and we've pursued it.
In a statement released by Hungry Jack's, the company said the allegations raised here appear to be an isolated incident. The matter was referred to police by the franchisee, while the manager involved has lost his job. Hungry Jack says international students are valued employees of the company. David Spicer, ABC News, Parklee.
Now, what's more important, a healthy diet or protecting the environment? Health experts are worried that a green agenda is influencing official thinking on what we're supposed to eat. It's all because of some draft guidelines by the National Health and Medical Research Council. In particular, a recommendation should limit how much fish we eat for environmental reasons.
We're bombarded with advice on what to eat for good health. But the final say on what we should be consuming goes to the federal government's National Health and Medical Research Council. It's revising its dietary guidelines, but a draft document has come under fire for saying that people should eat 1 serve of fish per week due to environmental concerns.
The Heart Foundation, based on the evidence reviews that we've done, we actually recommend that people should have at least 2 serves of fish a week.
The Heart Foundation concedes that any recommendations have to balance both health and environmental factors. After the draft report was made public, the NHMRC says the document was amended to say at least 1 serving of fish. It says green concerns have to be taken into consideration for practicals, but it won't be the driving factor when making recommendations. The Australian Food and Grocery Council believes the NHMRC has strayed out of its area of expertise.
The NHMRC's role is very clearly about defining what science tells us is a healthy diet for Australians. It's nothing to do with environmental issues at all.
Submissions can be made until November this year, with the revised dietary guidelines released next year. Sophie Scott, ABC News.
Papua New Guinea Prime Minister has allegedly made a death threat against an opposition MP during a chaotic parliamentary session. Parliament opened with the swearing-in of the Governor-General, but the session was then quickly adjourned by the Speaker. The opposition says it was a government ploy to prevent a motion of no confidence against the Prime Minister.
So these are what I'm calling bullying tactics by people who are power-hungry.
The Prime Minister, Sir Michael Somare, then walked to the opposition benches and allegedly repeatedly threatened to kill an MP.
He will kill me. And he said it 3 times.
The Prime Minister's office denies he threatened to kill anyone. Southern China has been devastated by floods and landslides caused by weeks of torrential rain. In Sichuan province, some parts have been hit with the heaviest flooding in more than 150 years. Entire city streets have been submerged, with homes and businesses destroyed. At least 146 people have died in the floods since the start of the month, and more than 1 million people in the region have been displaced. The massive Three Gorges Dam is nearing capacity, and there's no reprieve in sight, with more rain forecast this week. On to finance now, and Wall Street produced another rise today, pushing the local market slightly higher. Here's Alan Kohler.
Well, the All Ordinaries closed just 10 points higher, in fact, or 0.2%, after a 1% rise on Wall Street, although most of the European markets went backwards a bit. Big mining stocks like Rio Tinto led the rises. Telstra shares fell 2 cents, ahead of an announcement a short time ago that 300 senior managers will be made redundant to streamline the company's business processes. So that'll probably work, I suppose. The banks were mixed, with NAB doing the worst, and 10 network shares went up 3.5% after this report came out from Free TV Australia. It showed that total TV ad revenue had bounced back in the latest 6 months, but the 10 share has fallen, despite the success of MasterChef. 10 Network has now spat the macaroon, as it were, and said it's pulling out of the survey from now on because the figures have failed the taste test. On commodity markets last night, there were generally strong gains among the metals, and among precious metals, palladium outpaced gold, as well as all the others, which, as this graph shows, has been a common story for a few years. The thing is that unlike gold, palladium is actually useful for something other than wearing and gazing at. Most of it is used in auto-catalysts or catalytic converters. And because of the growth in car ownership in China, there's been a big rise in demand for palladium, and supply of the metal is lagging the growth in demand. Today's economic news in Australia is a leading index from Westpac Institute. The trend has fallen for the second month in a row, and economists at Westpac reckon it's peaked. If that's true, the government probably won't have to worry about an election campaign rate increase. The Australian dollar edged higher again. It's currently trading at 88 1/3 US cents. And that's finance.
To the NRL, and the embattled Melbourne Storm has a new chief executive. Ron Gorsey replaces Brian Waldron, described by the club's Owners News Limited as the chief rat in the team's salary cap scandal. An independent audit has found the Storm breached the cap by more than $3 million over the past 5 years. Mr Gorsey, who has a background in business management, says his first priority is ensuring next season's player roster meets the salary cap rules.
I've spoken to the players, I've spoken to David Gallop, I've spoken to Craig, and we as a club will do everything we can to resolve this matter as quickly as possible so we can all move on.
Ron Gorsey wouldn't be drawn on speculation that star player Greg Inglis will soon be moving north to play for the Brisbane Broncos. The colourful and sometimes controversial career of AFL star Jason Ackermanis has come to an end after he was sacked by his club for leaking confidential information. Ackermanis trained with the Western Bulldogs today, but was told afterwards he was no longer wanted.
Jason has been a very good player for our club since he arrived here in 2007. But recent events have made the relationship between Jason and the Western Bulldogs untenable.
The 33-year-old had been out of the team since May after writing a newspaper article urging homosexual players to stay in the closet. Spaniard Alberto Contador has apologised to Luxembourg's Andy Schleck over the controversial way he took the leader's yellow jersey in the Tour de France. Schleck accepted the apology, describing his rival as a man of character. Duncan Huntsdale reports.
Andy Schleck and Alberto Contador were back on speaking terms, unlike the previous day when Contador took advantage of Schleck's bike trouble and surged past to take an 8-second lead by the end of the stage.
My stomach is full of anger and I want to take my revenge, you know.
Contador realised he'd broken an unwritten rule and Schleck had cooled off before the start of last night's stage.
He came and he apologised to me, and you know that means a lot. It shows that he's a champion, he has character.
For me, we are at another day. I do not want our relationship to be as bad as it was yesterday. I think our relationship is very good.
Schleck was expected to attack on the penultimate stage in the Pyrenees, but he and Contador rode close to each other for much of the 200-kilometre trip from Bagnères de Luchon to Pau.
The crowd are recognising him as he climbs the mountain.
American Lance Armstrong is out of contention in the overall category and was desperate for a stage win on his last Tour de France, but the 7-time champion finished 6th as Peric Fedrigo became the 6th local winner on this tour.
And that is another victory for the French.
The cyclists will enjoy a rest day before one more stage in the Pyrenees. It's one of the most tenuous titles in world sport, Pakistan captain, but opening batsman Salman Butt is feeling confident.
The way I've seen my seniors captain my sides and people before and around the world, I think I should enjoy it.
Butt replaces Shahid Afridi, whose reign was brief, even by Pakistani standards.
It was his first test match in about 4 years and his first as skipper, and all of a sudden he's had enough.
but made 2 half-centuries in Pakistan's loss to Australia in the first test.
We have to make sure that we make life as tough as possible for him. Shouldn't be that much of a hassle.
Sri Lankan Matthiya Muralitharan was given a guard of honour as he stepped onto the field for his final test. Fittingly, his first wicket of the game was Indian legend Sachin Tendulkar. The off-spinner needs 8 wickets in this test to reach 800. Duncan Huntsdale, ABC News.
Once they came in their droves, lured by cuddly koalas and breathtaking beaches, but not anymore. Japanese tourist numbers have fallen by half in the past decade, thanks to competition from other destinations and a stronger Australian dollar. Tourism Australia is fighting back, though, launching a new offensive to win back the Japanese. More from North Asia correspondent Mark Willesee.
There's nothing like the sunrise.
It stars the usual array of stunning scenery, indigenous images and malleable marsupials. And for Tourism Australia, there's nothing like recapturing the Japanese market after a period of serious decline.
That's all sort of been down to a few things that we haven't had a lot of control over. The Japanese economy, H1N1 flu.
From a high of 800,000 visitors a little over a decade ago, less than half that number of Japanese journeyed to Australia last year. Today in Tokyo, Tourism Australia enlisted some Japanese celebrities to convince their compatriots to venture to the Antipodes.
I've been around Australia twice, driving 40,000 kilometres. This country is big, but I never get bored of it.
While there's optimism here that this new campaign will lure Japanese back down under, Australia is certainly facing much stiffer competition in the tourism market than it did just 10 years ago.
My number 1 is America, number 2 is India, and Australia is last.
I'd like to go to Australia, but compared to other countries, they don't have many famous places.
Back in the 1990s, the odd cuddly koala proved very lucrative in attracting Japanese tourists. This time round, it's movie stars as well as marsupial Australia's big pitch into Japan. Mark Willesee, ABC News, Tokyo.
Let's check the weather now, and no repeat of last night's showers, Graham.
No, not in Sydney, Juanita, but the coast between Foster and Port Stephens is currently getting a good dousing from showers. And falls since 9 a.m. Sydney have generally been confined to the areas east of Marrickville through to Hornsby, and even then 6 millimetres was the heaviest, and that was at Avalon. There is still the chance of a brief shower or two overnight. They are expected to remain coastal. And Grafton was the warmest town today. They had a very pleasant 20 degrees. And we also saw generally southerly winds across all district, and skies were partly cloudy for most areas. Apart from the southeast, there was also widespread frost over most of the ranges and inland. And after yesterday's minus 20 at Charlotte Pass, today's mercury fell to just minus 17. And to 9 a.m, the coast between Seal Rocks and Cronulla recorded the heaviest of the falls, and today's showers have been heaviest between Nelson Bay, Gloucester and also Foster. And Hobart and Sydney were the wettest of the capitals today, but falls in both cities were less than 1 millimetre. And cloud over the centre of the continent is high cloud. It's riding in on the jet stream, and it will have no impact on the weather over New South Wales. It's a strong high that's in the bight that's the dominant force on the state's weather. It's helping direct cold southerly winds and isolated showers along the coast, and it's also triggering those frosts overnight along the ranges and inland. But most rainfall in the coming days is set to be light and generally coastal, although some of the models are now suggesting better and more widespread rain developing early into next week. And Sydney and Melbourne will be the wet capitals tomorrow, but falls in both cities are once again expected to remain very light. And southeast to southwesterly winds are expected across New South Wales tomorrow. They'll be fresh at times along the coast, and we're also looking at isolated showers about the central and northern coasts. Some early frost and fog about the ranges and the slopes, and there's also the possibility of an isolated shower or two over the far south of the southern ranges, but it should be dry and mostly sunny over the rest of the ranges and the inland. Partly